I'd like to talk here about terminal pairing, and by terminal I mean these things here, the RJ45 plugs that go into the jacks in a computer or a switch or a router. And by the way, that is the correct terminology. Usually the jack is considered the stationary part, the one that it goes into, and the plug is considered the movable part that goes into it. By the way, people mess those names up all the time. Don't worry about it if you do. So let's take a look at what these cables look like. The twisted pair cable looks like this. Orange and orange stripe. Well, that's supposed to be orange. It looks kind of a tan here, but it's supposed to be orange. Blue and blue stripe, green and green stripe, brown and brown stripe. And then when it goes into the plug, it goes in like this. Now these are not the same order as the ones you see over here, but that's just, don't worry about that. We don't care about that right now. All I care about is the fact that pin 1 is the transmit pin, transmit plus. Pin 2 is the transmit minus. So in other words, the signal would go out of here into the other device and then return here. In other words, you have to have a full circuit. Just like any circuit, like an electrical circuit, you have to have a full circle in order for it to work. So we have a plus and a minus. The receive is the third one, and then down here at the 6th is a receive minus. So here's the problem. If I send a signal out from pin 1 and it goes directly into pin 1 on the other side, well, that doesn't work. I've got a transmit trying to go into a transmit. I can't do that. I need a transmit to go into a receive on the other device. So I have to cross these over somehow. And so we build what we call a crossover cable. And it looks like this. The plug on one end would have this type of setup, and the plug on the other end would have this type of setup. So that pins 1 and 3 are swapped, and pins 2 and 6 are swapped. That would be then a crossover cable. Now, as I'm looking at this cable right here, and I didn't look at this ahead of time before the video, they are the same on both ends. So this is a straight through cable, not a crossover. Now, it turns out that some devices, such as switches and PCs, it is common to plug the PC into a switch. And so the manufacturers have built these jacks here backwards so that you don't have to use the crossover cable. Here you would use a straight through cable because these are unlike devices. One has one type, one has the other type. So let's take a look at like and unlike devices so we know when we would use a crossover and when we would use a straight through. If we have like devices, PCs and routers are like devices. So from a PC to a router, or from a PC to a PC, or from a router to a router, those would be connecting like devices. So I would need a crossover cable for that. Same thing over here with switches and hubs. Switch to switch would require crossover. Hub to hub would require crossover, and switch to hub would require crossover. Unlike devices use a straight through cable. So if I'm going from a PC to a switch, and then from a switch to a router, those are all going to be straight through cables. So unlike devices, straight through. Here's a kind of a table of all of them. So I don't know if it's all of them, but pretty close. Straight through, switch to router, switch to PC, hub to PC. Crossover cable, switch to switch, hub to hub, PC to PC, router to router, like that. PC to router. So these are all crossover cables. So get to know these like and unlike devices, and then remember which ones of these. Remember, if they're unlike, if they're like devices, then they're going to have the same setup, which means you're going to have to cross them over in order to make the transmit go to the receive. Now, one last little bit here. We have some standards we call 568A and 568B. Now, if you have from 568A to 568A, then you have a straight through cable. If you have a 568B to a 568B, you have a straight through cable. But if you have 568A to a 568B, then you have a crossover cable. And so it's typical, it's common for most companies to decide ahead of time. Their IT department will decide, are we going to use type A or are we going to use type B as our standard? Now, it turns out most U.S. companies today use the 568B standard, although the U.S. government tends to use the 568A standard. You just got to make sure that you use the same standard across your entire organization. But if they're crossover cables, then it doesn't matter. You're going to have one end as a 568A, the other end as a 568B, and you've got a crossover cable.